There's definitely physiological reasons why people should do this, because it can actually benefit your health right away. There's like this acute response that you will benefit from, but also on the long term. So this could actually prevent lifestyle diseases. And also on a mental state, you can say that you can use this as a way of increasing your stress threshold, actually, and getting more confident, actually. That is one of the things that I discovered later on and not from the beginning. So I started my research in looking into what happens in the body, and since then I would just work my way around what else is going on.
Yeah. I think you've really touched on a few important things there for me. Like when I think about the cold and why my patients, why the general public should consider, intentionally exposing themselves to that cold, I kind of put these benefits into three different categories. The physical benefits, so things like your metabolism, potential benefits with weight loss, type 2 diabetes, the immune system, things like brown fat, which we're going to talk about, joint pain, all these things. Then I think about our mental health and well-being, so our resilience, mood, anxiety, depression. And then I think about athletics, and I think about recovery and endurance. So it's quite incredible that one modality,
one thing,
cold exposure, can potentially have so many different benefits, right?
Yeah, and you need to think about why is actually this one thing. Why is it that it can do so many good things? Why is it that we cannot get a pill to do exactly all those things? It cannot happen. We don't have that. But you can go into the cold and you can use it in very different ways. So if you have pain, you can go into the cold and you will have less pain, and that will last for the day at least. And if you are in a bad mood, you can go into the cold as well and you will feel much better. It's just, you can use it in so many different ways. You can use it for recovery, as you just said. And I think that it's very difficult to find something else that is that great, that can do so many good things. You can have so many reasons to go, and there is always something that the cold can repair for you in your body. So it seems like when I started my research, I was pretty much looking into the brown fat, which you just mentioned, but when I met people out there swimming around and I asked them, why do you use the cold? And every time I got a different answer. And every one of them seemed to have like one problem with this or one problem with that, and help in different ways. So it seems like maybe from an evolutionary point of view that this is something that we involved in, of course, but it's also something that we as human beings need to like reset our body in every way. So it's like going into the cold, that readjusted just everything in our system, our mood, our physiology. So if you have pain, that will go away. So it just seems like it's going to do everything good for us, no matter what kind of pain or what kind of issues that we have.
Yeah, you say pain there.
Yeah.
And when I hear the term pain now, I think physical pain and emotional pain. And it's something I've been thinking about for a while, but I spoke to this wonderful doctor a few weeks ago on the show called Dr. Howard Schubiner, and he was talking about a lot of the research he's done on chronic pain. And he was sharing how the body will have pain to a physical injury, but also to an emotional injury. And it shows up in the same part of the brain. And I think it's really great to connect that to the cold, because as you say, the cold is having these physical benefits, but also these mental and emotional benefits as well.
Yeah, but it's also just our body and mind is connected, of course. So if we go into the cold, it's going to change something physical, right?
Yeah.
And that will, of course, also connect with our brain, and that's going to change something in the brain. So the brain, when we go into the cold, there will be a release of neurotransmitters, all these good chemicals in the brain, and that will float around in your body as well, and all these hormones. So it's going to connect how you feel. So if you can take away the physical pain, that is also what's going on, happening in the mind.
This whole field of science versus anecdote is really interesting to me, and one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you is because there is a lot of anecdotal knowledge and wisdom about the cold, but I don't know anyone who's studied it as much as you, and it's really amazing to say, yeah, you know, humans have kind of known this for hundreds of thousands of years, but you're now showcasing with your science what exactly might be going on. So I definitely want to get into all of that. I want to make this super practical for people as well. But Susanna, I thought near the start of this conversation, I really want to address the issue that many people have, which is, I just don't want to get cold.
Yeah.
Like, it's not for me. If I speak to my wife about a cold shower or doing some cold immersion, she will point blank refuse. No, that's not for me. You know, I'm not good with the cold.
No, exactly.
Right, so
Yeah.
can you just speak to that at the start
Yeah.
here?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that is definitely the main thing. The thing is that in our society, we are now in a time where we don't want to get uncomfortable. We are so used to seeking comfort all the time, and we want that. We want everything to be warm. We want everything to be easy food, fast food. We want everything to be right at our hands. And we have taught ourselves that the cold is not something that is useful for anything. And I kind of understand why, because, well, we haven't really for a long time known what does the cold actually do for us. Is it beneficial for us? It's quite new that, as you said, that the science has catch up with this intuitively good thing to do, right? So it's actually brand new that we know that this is good for us. So that is why we're sitting here, right? We're talking about what is the benefits of this on a scientific level. But for thousands of years, we have known intuitively that this is good. So if we go back to Hippocrates, let's go back to the ancient times where they already knew that this is really, really good. So he said that using cold and heat actually for these ancient philosophers from that time said that you should go into the cold water, you should go into the hot water, because it's good for your cardiovascular system and it's good for your heart. So they already advised it back then.
Yeah.
And people were doing this all over. They called it thermalism. So they were doing this everywhere, and it was something everybody thought of as beneficial for them, and there was no really proof of this. But since thermalism and until maybe today, there has been wars going on, and also the Titanic disaster also kind of put a shadow over the cold water, because then people found out that if you drown, if you fall into very cold water, you get hypothermic and you would die within 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And that was not very good for the cold water and its reputation. So no scientist at that time wanted to pick up this basic science and say, well, we need to study more on the beneficial sides of this, because it really had this dark history now. So then we actually, not until, if you go back in the science literature, you will find old physiology studies, but these are not that old actually. They go back to the 70s or maybe the 80s, and then up until today, there are more and more studies on the you can say the physiology of the cold. But up until then, people didn't want to really touch it because of all these accidents and stuff that was going on back then. But this is not. This is, of course, accidents, which we shouldn't compare to doing deliberate cold exposure. So that is why we are catching up now. But this was one of the questions I needed to have answered for myself. Why is it that we are so behind on this research? Why is it that I can come today and tell you about cold water exposure and brown fat and the beneficial side of this, and we are in 2022. So I think it's a bit late, but we are picking up. We are getting back to the thermalism.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that historical kind of narrative. I didn't know a lot of that, actually. And when you mentioned the Titanic, the first thing that came to my mind as you were saying that was that we don't not get in a car because there are car accidents, and in a multi-car pile-up on the motorway, a lot of people may well die or get, seriously injured.
Yeah. But we do it anyways.
But we still do it.
Yeah.
We go, no, I'm still going to drive
Yeah.
or take a car or a bus here, right? So it is fascinating, and I think I'm really interested, always have been, in terms of why a lot of the stuff that the science is now showing has been practiced by humans from all different parts of the world for years. Like you mentioned Hippocrates. Hippocrates also said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. And now there's a growing recognition in the last 10, maybe 15 years that, oh, the food that you eat can actually be used in a medicinal way or a non-medicinal way. And traditional Chinese medicine for years has been talking about that different parts of the body are more active at different times of the day.
Yeah.
And, I think Western science looked down on that for years. And,
Yeah.
in the last 10 years with chronobiology and this, we're seeing, oh, yeah, they were right.
Yeah.
So I find that really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible for everyone to start to embrace the cold? Or do you think some people, like my wife, for example, if she
Yeah.
says the cold is not for me, is that something they should, because the first time they go in, they're struggling, so they don't want to do it anymore. Is that a good reason for them not to do it at all?
No, not in my opinion, because I mean, the more they reject it, the more they might even need it actually.
Yeah.
Because you need to go into the cold multiple times to get at least just a little bit used to it. So in the beginning, it would definitely be very hard, and that is something that you need to push through. You can use it as a way of also it's a kind of training, you can say, just like going to the gym. Your muscles will be sore, and going into the first cold shower or cold plunge will also hurt you in a way because the cold pain is there, right? But for every time you go to the gym or every time you go to the cold, you can see that as exercise, not only exercise in the cold for your physiology, but it's also a mental kind of workout that you're doing. You're pushing yourself to the uncomfortable state, and every time you do that, you get a little bit stronger. Not only in your cells, but also in your mind. So every time you can do that, you push yourself a little bit. You get more confident. Next time, I can do this again.
Yeah.
So going into the cold, this is in our DNA. I mean, we evolved in the cold. So if people say that, well, the cold is not for me, you can tell your wife, well, you're involved in the cold. The cold and your ancestors did this all the time. This is the reason why we are here.
Yeah.
So if they can do it, we can do it. And they were healthy because they were living out there. The cold was just something that they embraced every day.
Yeah.
And they were chased by lions and hunting all the time. And then they relaxed. So they also had this, you can say, going into the cold, but then they also relaxed. So this is called the eustress. So this is the healthy kind of stress.
Yeah.
So you stress your body in a very good way, but then you also pause. So you have like you're calm maybe rest of the day, or you're not too stressful at least. But this modern society, we're doing something completely different. We have turned this upside down. So now we are stressed all day, and then we go do something that will also stress us, and we don't find the peace in between. So we have this kind of like dripful all the time, all day of stress, which then eventually will be chronic stress. But going into the cold is a very stressful. It's very potent, the temperature, but it's very useful because you only do it at that time, and then you're calm afterwards.
Yeah.
So we need to learn what is actually stress.
It's such an important point. You mentioned, I guess, comfort. Comfort is killing us. As humans, we've always been wired to make things easier, to seek out comfort. But until recently, even though we're wired that way, we would have been exposed to discomfort pretty much every day. I guess that the extreme of that is now, where, I don't know what it's like in Denmark, but certainly here in the UK, and I know in America, you can literally sit on your sofa and on an app, order whatever food you want, and have it delivered to your door 10 or 15 minutes later, right? So, and often that food isn't, let's say, the most health-promoting food that we could be eating. That is an extreme version of how, acquiring food is something we would always have required to put some effort into.
Yes.
To hunt or to gather, right? And then even to cook it. But every little bit of discomfort has been engineered out of our lives.
Exactly.
Movement,
Yeah.
escalators, lifts, right? All these things now,
Yeah.
you don't have to move anymore. You can still function. I think the cold is just a brilliant example of that. I totally agree with you that I think many people who struggle with the cold probably struggle with it because they're not exposed to it. Now, I understand some people have got thyroid issues, which can change your cold tolerance, so I just want to be clear on that.
Yeah.
I think for many of us, we've narrowed our experience of life. Everything's, let's talk about temperature. We've got heating or air conditioning at home and in the car and in the office. So we're never being exposed, so our whole world is coming inwards, which is why, presumably, we have this low tolerance to anything, low tolerance to stress, low tolerance to heat. And I absolutely agree with you that regularly, with these controlled doses of exposure to this form of stress, will, little by little, start to widen that window. So, over time, yes, you're more tolerant to the cold, but you'll also be more tolerant to the stress that you experience in everyday life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's exactly. So taking the cold out of your everyday, which we have done. We have warm clothes on. We have very warm rooms. We sleep with big pillows and blankets and everything. So we are not exposing ourselves to something that we were actually born to do, to be involved in different temperatures. And we actually know this from a very special organ that we have in our body. Nobody knows about this organ. It's not something that we have explored that much, but it's called the brown fat. So the healthy brown fat, I call it healthy, and it is healthy because, but I just want to outline that it's healthy. So the healthy brown fat is quite opposite to our white fat. And this special, little bit mystic organ that we have is actually the temperature regulator that we have in our body. And if we don't get exposed to temperature, different temperatures changing on our skin, then we are not using this organ in our body.
Yeah.
And many people were like, well, do we need it? Then, because if we are not exposed to any different temperatures, then we might not need it. But then actually, we have found out that this organ is not only controlling our temperature from the inside, it's actually also helping your metabolism. So it has a huge impact on our health. And we can see in studies that if people don't have the healthy brown fat, we see that they have a higher, they have more obesity. They have a larger, higher BMI, but they also have type 2 diabetes. So there's definitely a correlation of less brown fat and being overweight and having type 2 diabetes and have cardiovascular diseases. And this is also increasing, of course, with age. But we also see that if you have brown fat, that your energy expenditure goes up, and that you will have a lower blood pressure, you will have less obesity and not having type 2 diabetes, for example. So people or scientists from, I think it was about the millennium actually, so it's quite new that people are doing all this research in it. But we found out that if we can activate the brown fat, it will not only increase our temperature from the inside, but it will also use our glucose and it will use our fat from our bloodstream as fuel. And this is really good for us because then we are cleaning up some of the stuff that we have put in and sitting out on our couch and eating all this very comforting food. So we have too much of that. That's why we have all these lifestyle diseases. But the brown fat is not being used in our society because we are so comfortable all the time. So if we can get cold on our skin, we can activate the brown fat, and it will do that immediately, actually. So as soon as you get in the cold, or go outside, actually, just in a t-shirt, you will have cold receptors on the skin, sending a signal to the brain in the temperature regulating center, and that will release norepinephrine, or adrenaline, you can also call it. So this stressor will activate your brown fat cells, which will then take sugar and fat in as fuel to generate heat. So you actually get warmer by going into the cold. So when your wife says, I don't want to do this stuff for me because I'm so cold, I would say, well, if you just do it a little bit and you just keep practicing, tell yourself that this is really good. Susanna's study has shown that winter swimmers get warmer by going into the cold, then she will thank me sometimes, I hope.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, she actually is the producer on this show, so let's see when she hears this if she keeps it in or chops it out, but I'm sure she'll keep it in. Susanna, what you said there was fascinating, right? But let's just rewind a second. You mentioned healthy brown fat. So, by and large, across society, the word fat has negative connotations.
Absolutely.
For many years, people, have been fearing fat. They don't want fat on their body. They don't want fat in their food. Now, regarding diet, that started to change over the last 10 or 15 years, where there's been a recognition that actually some fats are very healthy and certainly health promoting for the body, whereas certain fats are not, right? So the narrative around fat when it comes to food and diet has started to change. But I think it's really interesting to hear that even the fat in our body has, for want of a better term, kind of good fats and bad fats, right? I know it's not a perfect term, but this white fat that I think many of us are used to, the fat under our skin, by and large, I think it's fair to say most people want less white fats.
Yes.
But you're saying that we should all probably want to have more brown fat in our bodies. And one of the ways we can do that is with cold.
Yes.
Now, across all ages, what are levels of brown fat like, let's say, in babies, children, adults, as we get older? So that's the first part of this question. How does that change? But I'm also interested, are we as a society losing brown fat because we're in temperature-controlled environments all the time, therefore we have no need for it? So I wonder if you could answer those two parts there, please.
Yeah, really good questions. And I think that we definitely need to just talk a little bit about what is the brown fat and where does it actually start. So we are born with brown fat, actually a lot of it. So babies have a lot of brown fat actually on the back. And you can say compared to the rest of the body, it's quite a lot actually. And that is because babies cannot shiver when they get cold, because the muscles are not developed enough to generate heat. So there are two systems in our body that can generate heat. So it's the brown fat and it's also the muscles. But the muscles are kind of too slow to actually save us in you can say in a dangerous situation where you are exposed to cold. So if you put a baby out on the table without clothes, it would definitely start activating the brown fat immediately. But but if it's less than 6 months old, it's not. It cannot really shiver in the muscles. So it's necessary for a baby to survive to have brown fat.
Nature knows best.
No, nature knows best, exactly. So, but with age, scientists found that it decreases with age. But that also fits with, you can say, the time where we can actually use the muscles also to generate heat in our body. So we don't need as much brown fat as adults as we need as babies. So probably that is why we get less of it. But what we see is that until the age of 40, most people actually have brown fat. And we also see that you can gain more brown fat if you are exposed to stressors as cold, which will then generate more brown fat. So what we see is that after the age of 40, there's a decline. And it's correlating with obesity and it's correlating with type 2 diabetes and lifestyle diseases. And we don't know really what comes first, but if it's obesity and then less of the brown fat, but it's also about the lifestyle, right? So if you are not moving, if you're not exercising and you are not getting into cold, you're not stressing your body in a healthy way, you will get more of the white fat, which is on our stomach and you want to get less of that, but you also, unfortunately, the brown fat will disappear. So there's actually studies showing from, I think it was 2009, where they showed that people who sleep in a cold room, or people who sleep in a warm room for a month, they measured on these MRI imaging, they could see how much brown fat do these people have. And then they slept in the same in a room at 19 degrees, so colder, at least not very cold, but 19 degrees Celsius, right? That is okay cold. And they saw that they increased the amount of brown fat, but also that they get more insulin sensitive, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, so that is just 1 month. Sleeping at 19 degrees, they saw the increasing amount of brown fat. And there's a picture in the book where you can see the brown fat. That is some of my research results actually in there, so you can see where it's located. So the imaging is of the supraclavicular bones, where you can see the largest depot that we have, but it's also located down the spine.
Wow.
Everything is just, the brown fat is close to the central nervous system, which makes sense, right? Because the cold is the main driver for activating our brown fat.
Yeah.
Because it needs to save us as we evolved as humans, right? So we can immediately, when we get cold, it can be activated and make this temperature control in the body and activate our metabolism, because we need fuel to fuel these brown fat cells, which is taking up all this fat and sugar in our bloodstream.
You know, what I love about that study, you know, a theme already, which I keep bringing up, is the reluctance of people to want to get cold. I spoke to Dr. Roger Schwelt maybe a year ago or so on this podcast, and he mentioned some of the research on the immune system, and we'll get to that for sure, in terms of what cold can do for the immune system, which is really interesting, really impressive to hear, really helpful for people. But you always get these comments, it's not for me, you know, the cold. But what you're saying there is just simply sleeping in a cool room, so not a super hot, central heating driven room, even that alone will increase levels of brown fat. That's probably quite achievable for people.
It is. It is. I mean, it's so many people think that, this mystic new brown fat, you need to get into a cold tub and you need to be there for 10 minutes or something like that. It's very extreme, I think. It's very extreme that you go into a cold and sit there for a very long time. Some people do it for half an hour. It's not that I'm trying to promote, at least. I'm just saying that try to get cold in some way. If it's a cold shower, then do that. If you like cold plunging, then do that. But you can also turn down the heater in your living room and just sleep very cold. I mean, if I ask my grandparents, they would say, I always sleep cold. I have the window open. And as a child, I was like, why?
Yeah.
Why are you doing that? And they always said, because it's healthy for us.
Yeah.
But I was brought up in another, you can say, time where we were trying to get more comfortable, even more.
Your grandparents knew it.
Yeah, they knew it.
They didn't need your research. They didn't need a scientific study. They didn't need PubMed. They're like, this is healthy.
That's just
We know it is. And you know, funnily enough, like, we know from the sleep research that cooler rooms promote better sleep.
Yes.
Yet, as it gets cool, I understand people don't want to get cold. I understand. I don't want to be very sensitive. I understand that a lot of people are struggling economically. They're struggling to heat their homes. I do appreciate that. So I want to make sure we're being super sensitive to that. But at the same time, I think there's many of us who are overly heating our rooms. I know, you know, the amount of times I've spoken to my patients about, why don't you just reduce the temperature in your room at night? And they come back and say, oh, wow, I went to bed feeling a little bit cold, but I had the best night's sleep ever.
Exactly.
You know, but again, we're conditioned away from discomfort. So we go to bed and we think, I need to put the heater on. I need to put the heater on because it's too cold.
Yeah.
You're actually going to sleep better as well.
Yeah. Exactly.
I also find it really interesting what you said, that above the age of 40, it looks as though we're losing brown fat. And then I think to all the public conversations around obesity, metabolic health, type 2 diabetes, and people are talking about, you know, the lack of movement in society. They're talking about how diet has changed and the sorts of foods many of us are eating, and it's easy to put everything down to food and exercise. And we're learning from the sleep research how sleep deprivation increases your risk of obesity, how you're going to eat more when you've not slept well, etc., etc. And I think we're learning that it's multifaceted. There may not just be one reason. There's lots of different factors. And you're now bringing up for me, well, what is coming first? Are we, you know, could brown fat be a huge player here? You know, maybe not causative in and of itself, but maybe as part of the strategy, like being temperature controlled all the time means we're losing this brown fat. And I think, did you mention it? It's like a furnace.
It is. You can call it like, you can call it a radiator. So it's our inner heater. And you can say the thermostat is our brain, because the brain is increasing the adrenaline, the noradrenaline, which is going to activate the brown fat. But it's going so quickly. So our inner heater, the brown fat, will get activated as soon as you just get a little bit cold on your skin. So it's kind of like balancing our temperature. So what we talked about before also, you don't need to get into freezing cold water to activate your brown fat. And you don't need to be there for a very long time to get any benefits from it. So just getting cold from different reasons will keep your brown fat alive. And what I mean alive is that the brown fat cells, they need to get activated to stay alive. It's like a muscle. You can compare the brown fat to a muscle. It is also another color from white fat, actually. So the white fat is more yellowish, and the brown fat has its brown color from mitochondria. So in the brown fat cells, there are these energy fabrics called mitochondria, and there are more of those in the brown fat compared to the white fat cells. That is why we can activate the brown fat by cold, and that is taking up the sugar and the fat from the bloodstream as fuel, but also you can increase the efficiency of these cells. And one of my hypotheses from my studies was that could we get more efficient brown fat cells, meaning that could we generate more heat from the brown fat cells if we keep exposing the brown fat cells to cold? Or will we increase the amount of tissue that we have, the brown fat tissue? So that is actually why we did this study in winter swimmers, because I wanted to see if something you can say nice for some people, at least for winter swimmers, it's nice to go and winter swim. An activity like that, could that be a way to keep our brown fat alive, to keep our metabolism up and keep us healthy? Because I think it's a bit underrated, actually, the brown fat. Yeah. It is mystic, but it's also underrated, what it's doing for us. But we can definitely see in my studies and also in humans that if you don't have that much brown fat, that you will have more obesity, more lifestyle diseases, higher cholesterol levels, and higher blood pressure.
If you're keen to get started with cold immersion, but you're not sure where to start, we actually filmed Susanna taking me through my very first cold immersion. It's a step-by-step guide. It's super practical. I think you'll get a lot of value from it. So if you want to take a look at that right now, all you have to do is click the link in the first description box below.
So it's definitely something of a joker, you can say, in the body. But it, as you said, it works together with all the other things. But it reminds us that if we go out, use stressors as cold to activate our central nervous system and our metabolism, it's definitely an easy way, I think, to keep ourselves just a little bit more healthy.
It's a powerful image that the brown fat in our body is going to start sucking out the sugar and the fat and start burning it.
Yeah.
That's a very powerful image. You know, the amount of people across society who are trying to improve their health lose a bit of their weight or more of their weight depending on, you know, their current state of health. And this could be a relatively simple, potentially free for many people, part of an overall strategy. Maybe not the only thing they do, but maybe as part of everything else, you just add this in. It's another maybe 10 or 15% of the way. Who knows? You know, I find that really interesting. I'm also fascinated by, you know, when did we first discover brown fat? Do you know when that was?
1531. The first time we discovered the brown fat was by this scientist who was exploring the physiology of hibernating animals. And he cut up this animal, he found the brown fat, and he was like, well, this is a mystic kind of fat or tissue or muscle or whatever. And he found out that this was activated by cold, and that only hibernating animals actually had this. So he found out that the hibernating animals needed the brown fat to survive through the winter, because then they could use that as the inner heater during hibernation, of course. But later on, they found out that the scientists found out that this is also present in humans, and it's also not hibernating animals, which is quite fascinating, I think. If you look at squirrels, for example, squirrels are hibernating as well, and they go down to 2 degrees when they're hibernating, which is a thing I find is super fascinating that they can stay alive
in such cold.
In such cold, and that's because they have brown fat. And this has been studied, but this is many years ago. But all these studies that scientists have done on this have been like, well, they came to a wall where they saw, oh, we cannot really go further with this because we cannot get funding, because now it's kind of like disproving that this is only for hibernating animals. Now humans have it as well, we found out, but that is not until the 1960s or something, where we saw it by coincidence, actually. That is quite fascinating that so many years we knew about this in animals, but we were kind of like, well, we don't need this. It's kind of like not needed for people, because we are living in houses now, and what is this actually doing?
It's amazing that it was first discovered in the 1500s, and what are we now, like 600 years, 700 years later?
Yeah.
You know, something that we've known. That's incredible. I'm also thinking, I mean, this is brilliant, Susanne. It's really getting me thinking about the potential implications across society, these scientific discoveries. Well, we talk a lot about muscle, right, and sarcopenia, and as we get older, we lose muscle mass. So, arguably, strength training it becomes more important as we get older.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of feeling something similar with brow fat, whereby we have it as babies, and you're saying after the age of 40, we're starting to see less and less of it. So arguably it's more important, potentially, I'm putting it to you, that we look after it above the age of 40.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking, I wonder if we had studied humans 200 years ago, before all these modern comforts, you know, when people were more active, when they weren't living in these temperature-controlled environments. I wonder back then, would brown fat have been lower after the age of 40? You know, is this a modern problem?
Yeah,
it's a modern,
it's a modern problem, definitely. I'm pretty sure it is, because if you go back, we didn't see people at age 40 and above being obese like today. We didn't see that. So it's definitely from the 80s or something like that. We see obesity and lifestyle diseases increasing a lot, and we also see that that exactly around the same age we see that people have less brown fat, or it's getting inactivated in a way. So what I actually think is that if we use the cold as prevention also, you can keep your brown fat alive. If you keep activating it, it will be more efficient. It will also know, it's like any other thing in our body. If we use it, then it's useful, and then the body keeps it. If you don't use your muscles, they will also get smaller, right? So if you use your brown fat and you exercise it with always changing the temperature, then you will also tell your body, well, I actually need this.
Yeah.
I need to increase my metabolism. I need to get cold. I need you to adjust my temperature so I won't die from hypothermia. And if you keep your organ alive like that, you will also get healthier. So that is actually what just practical what you're doing when you're going into the cold. You are telling your brown fat, I need you. And I need you to be very efficient. So please increase more mitochondria and please disband.
It's like across society we've traded in our brown fat for white fat.
Yes, we have. Yeah.
You know, another way of looking at it, it's really quite remarkable. Look, we mentioned the potential benefits for obesity and type 2 diabetes, and you know, brown fat is one of the key mechanisms there for us to think about. We mentioned resilience and how, you know, deliberately doing something uncomfortable is going to make it easier for you to cope with that stress, tolerate the cold, and that's going to transfer to other areas of your life. That's interesting. Let's go about the immune system. A lot of people are always looking, particularly at this time of year, how can we look after our immune system? There's a beautiful section in the book on this. You talk about lots of different studies. I wonder if you could start off with the cold shower one, because cold showers are probably one of the most achievable things for people across the world, right? They can probably get into a cold shower. They don't have to go anywhere, join a club somewhere, all that kind of stuff. So, but that was a pretty powerful study, I thought.
Yeah, I think so too. It's a randomized controlled trial, which was done in Amsterdam. I think it's in Holland, in the Netherlands. But the study is about cold showers versus hot showers, you can say. So all the participants in this study, they were divided into different groups. We don't need to go into the nitty-gritty stuff about that, but the thing was that they wanted to see what happens if you end your shower, your hot shower, on cold. What happens after 30 days if you do that? and if you do it for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and 90 seconds, which is not very long, right?
Okay, so
but
people are having a hot shower,
they have a hot shower.
and they do literally, at the end they finish with cold, but it's
Yeah.
either 30 seconds cold, 60 seconds cold, or 90 seconds cold.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not long.
That's not long, but it's long if you don't like the cold. So, and it's also very stressful, right? So you can say, if you turn to the cold right away, it's very stressful. And then 30 seconds can be very long. But you can build this up, just like the cold plunge or going into the sea. It's just about training this. But what they found, I found very fascinating actually, was that they saw that ending on the cold shower for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, or 90 seconds, it doesn't really matter apparently. So 30 seconds is enough, but they saw that they have less sick days from work. So less sick days from work could be an outcome of maybe boosting your immune system, and that way you also feel better because of the chemicals in the brain. So it could also be that. It's the whole package of like going into the cold and getting this increase in all the brain chemicals, but also a boost in your immune system. So this boost has in a way kept them from being that sick that they need to stay home at least.
Yeah.
So compared to the control group. So I find this very fascinating. So you don't have to go long. It's just, if you can build up to 30 seconds, then you will boost your immune system.
That's a general point that I was going to make. Whether we're talking about cold showers or cold plunge or winter swimming.
Yeah.
Was, is it the law of diminishing returns? So, do you get most of the benefit right at the start? Like with the cold shower, 30 seconds appears to be just as good as 60 or 90.
Yeah.
And you see now a lot of ego, I think, being brought into the cold immersion world, which I want to touch on later because I think it's actually problematic.
Yeah.
Where people are trying to out-compete each other.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think just bringing it back to make it practical, it's the first bit, right, that gives most of the benefit.
I think the reason why the first 30 seconds is just enough is actually that there's something called hormesis, and hormesis is the healthy stress. Healthy stress is when you just shock your cells, right, from the cold shower or going into the plunge. And that is when the cells think, oh, this is dangerous, oh, we need to do something to protect ourselves, and then it builds the cells stronger. And that is kind of like phase 2, so the acute, the shock, and then it makes the cell stronger, more robust in the second phase. But there's also a third phase where you can exhaust the cells, meaning that you overdid your stress. You overdid the stress, which means that it comes to being chronic, you can say. Even though you can say 90 seconds in the shower is not that long, how can that be too much for the cells? Well, you need to think about temperature as something that is actually very stressful for the body. So you don't need to do it for a long time. You just need to awaken the cells and you do it acutely. So the acute response is what we need, and that is called the microstress. Microstress is exactly what you can say the sweet spot. So you will have the healthy stress, and then you don't need to go further. You don't need to sit in a cold tub for 30 minutes because then you have exhausted your cells, and you will definitely flatten out the benefits. And we see that from sauna actually.
Right.
Yeah. So there's these sauna studies. So you can say that temperature, either going cold or going hot, it's kind of like it's on a scale, right? So, and in the middle you have the neutral temperature. But if you go very hot or you go very cold, it's the body's going to respond to that in practically the same way, because the body will tell you, well, this you can have, but now it's getting too much, too warm or too cold for too long time, and that's going to exhaust the cells. So we see in these Finnish sauna cohort studies, which I find very fascinating.
Yeah, they really are, aren't they?
They are so fascinating. I think they are up to now 28 years, where they have followed these 2,000 to 3,000 sauna bathers. And in Finland, they go into the sauna, but they also go into the cold. It could be a sea, or it could also be rolling in the snow. So different kinds of cold exposure. So they go back and forth to the sauna. But what they see is that if people go into the sauna 19 to up to 29, 30 minutes, we see that they have all the good healthy benefits on the long term. So this study is a cohort study, so they followed these people for many years, and they see that they have all these healthy benefits of better cardiovascular system and the lower risk of blood clots in the legs, and also less stroke and so on. But they also see that if you go further than 30 minutes in the sauna, the benefits will flatten out, or even actually increase the risk of all these outcomes that they have looked at. So you can definitely look at this as, well, heat is also a stressor, and that is cold also, but cold is very much more potent than the heat is. We have more cold receptors also on the skin.
Yeah, I read that. In your book you mentioned there's 3 to 10 times more cold receptors on our skin than heat ones.
Yeah.
But why do you think that is?
Well, you are more. You can say you would die definitely quickly from being too cold. So from nature's side, this is very clever, right? It's really, really clever because we need the cold receptors to tell us immediately, now something is really, really wrong. You can get hypothermic within 15 minutes in cold water and you will die, actually. So we need more cold receptors. That is also why it's more potent. So you cannot say, well, if I can stay in the sauna for 30 minutes or 19 minutes, then I can also stay in a cold tub with water that is 0 degrees for 19 minutes. It's not the same because it is 10 times, definitely more, 10 times more potent than the heat.
So there's a relativity. It's like
it's the relativity.
For athletes listening, you can't equate running a marathon 26.2 miles with cycling 26.2 miles.
No.
It's
not the same.
It's not the same. You'd have to cycle a lot more to have an equivalent effect, and I think it's a useful way to think about cold and heat. You maybe you need a bit more heat exposure to get some of those benefits, but you don't need much cold. I think it's a wider point here, Susanne, which I really want to just pause on for a minute, because I think the research you've done is